From the Iroquois people comes a proverb known as the principle. Quote, in every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the seventh generation, end quote. And from military theorists comes a concept, the generations of war. Together, from a concept of sustainability and a concept of war, emerges seventh generation warfare. This is Seventh Generation Warfare. I'm your current host, John Nelson, and this episode is titled An Introduction into Gene Wars. Seventh Generation Warfare is nonviolent warfare, ensuring that our descendants control their own wills. Most of Seventh Generation Warfare is done through nurture, if you think of the dichotomy of nature versus nurture, as you've probably heard before. Most of Seventh Generation exists in the nurture aspect of how you parent, what stories, examples, legends, and values you share from your ancestors, as I talked about having a family anthology, or through having a good defensive position, through being ready side up and making sure that no sudden misfortune can come in and derail your family off your path and affect your will that way, or various other things that we talk about on this channel, for which you can check out more of my videos. However, Gene Wars focuses more on the natural aspects of things. Really, when it comes down to the genes of your gene pool, and let's just assume, for the sake of this video, that mainstream genetic science that we've been taught over the past 30 years or whatever, just assume that that's kind of the framework we're setting this in. Although I wouldn't be personally making any claims about how that all works, or what is responsible for what, how much is nature, how much is nurture. It's best just to assume, be on the safe side, and assume that there is a genetic component to our abilities, our attributes as people, that it's not just all nurture. And as such, we need to give thought to our gene pools and how that might affect our seventh generation warfare. So, we were talking about attributes. There really are two main types of attributes that we are selecting for. The first is emotional, mental, spiritual. This would be things like, and this isn't only for you. This can be used for your own selection of a spouse, but it can also be used in advising your descendants on the selection of their spouses. Is a potential spouse of good emotional standing, or are they emotionally unhinged? Do they have mental health issues? Do they have a good spiritual core, or are they kind of nihilistic and lost? And are they intelligent, or are they dumb as bricks? Those are the types of attributes we want to be giving thought to as to whether or not we want to admit them into our gene pool. And then on the physical side of things, it could be, life expectancy. What was the life expectancy of their ancestors? Did all their ancestors die of heart attacks and cancer at 40 or 50 years old? Or did their ancestors all live to be, 90 and had good quality of life? Or is this individual, the individual you're looking at, are they super prone to injury? Do they constantly have broken bones or other health issues? This could be a sign of bad genetics. And I want to say it's none of this in and of itself is a reason to exclude somebody from the gene pool. It's just as seventh generation warfare, we have to be cognizant of all these things. So that's the point. But that being said, nitpicking people's attributes can quickly get very out of hand. And if you think of like a seventh grader who's just first getting interested in the other in dating or in the opposite sex and the things that they think are important as far as attributes, you can see how absurd some of it can be, that you're not picking a mate based on the color of their hair or how tall they are or what color eyes they have or even you know how smooth their skin is or something absurd. There's really two main questions you have to ask yourself when it comes to somebody's genetic representation and seventh generation warfare. First would be, is does their does the potential spouse's genetic makeup prohibit them from being a good parent that is able to help secure the will of their children? That's what seventh generation warfare is about. If they're emotionally unhinged all the time, they're going to be absent emotionally from their children, and that's not going to be good. Or if they're constantly injured or have a health issue and are in the hospital, that could have all kinds of other issues for the children. So is the person's health or genetics themselves going to be a problem? And then the second question is, if this person's genetics are mixed into the gene pool, could some of these things be passed on to descendants and create issues for the descendants, right? So it might not directly affect one's ability to parent or be a good parent, but it might affect the quality of life of the child, in which case it's still relevant for a seventh generation warfare. And so those are the things you should be assessing when thinking whether somebody's attributes have an impact on seventh generation warfare. So with that being said, I think you'll start to get a sense of what this kind of parallels. And if I had to summarize gene wars in one word, the word would be eugenics. Now, eugenics has a lot of negative connotation about it, and I hope that you can put that all aside. The word genetics really just means good genes or good birth, and of course we want all our descendants to be as healthy as possible, and have all the opportunities that they can afforded to them. And so we hope that through education of ourselves and our descendants, there can be a continuous choosing of good mates that procure healthy, well-rounded, good a good gene pool, right? We don't want it to get contaminated with bad genetic conditions. So, but I will just do the disclaimer of it is not, things that eugenicists, people under the eugenics banner did in the past were, say, infanticide. Infanticide is strictly against seventh generation warfare. I think it's safe to assume that all unborn babies and all recently born babies want to live, and therefore killing a baby at any stage is against seventh generation warfare. Another thing that eugenicists in the past did was forced sterilizations. The idea is that our gene pools are going to be so good that we want more of our genes to be expressed in the world. We want to be having lots of kids, and not only affecting our own gene pool, but bringing all of humanity up with our gene pool by having lots of kids and becoming a greater and greater proportion of the population. So also forced sterilization would be against the will of our kids. So forced sterilization is also against seventh generation warfare. And lastly, prohibiting interracial marriages and stuff. Seventh generation doesn't take a stance on what race is or what attributes you deem necessary or not necessary. I, however, do not believe that there is any philosophical basis for the concept of race. That's, you may have never heard somebody say that before, and I could share that in another video perhaps. But I don't understand the concept of race, and so I personally will not include that into my seventh generation war fight. I don't care if it the other attributes are what matter. Is somebody intelligent, have strong family values, well balanced emotionally, cares for, uh, wants to fight a seventh generation warfare. Those are the things that I'd be advising my children on selecting their mates, not whatever race is. I was about to say color of skin, but that's not even what race is. So there's that. So gene wars is eugenics, just not the eugenics that you were thinking. I hope that clears that up. Um, what else did I want to discuss? So we how what are some things to teach our kids? Well, first we need to be involved in our kids' romantic lives. We need to give them sex talk at an appropriate age. Don't just bypass that because it could have catastrophic side effects. For instance, if the child gets pregnant, teen pregnancy, the parent is an absentee parent, etc., or even if they stay together and they hate each other, um, all those things can lead to very bad outcomes for seventh generation warfare. So not only are we selecting for the genes in the pool, but like how the genes are manifested. We want to maximize the amount of genes, right? So if people have dysfunctional relationships, they're not likely to have lots of kids. They're likely to have maybe just one, or not be well invested in. They might still have lots of kids, but not be well invested in those kids, and those kids could not learn the positive attributes, etc. Um, so pregnancy, when it's not wanted, can be a very bad thing, and the best way to prevent that is by teaching uh, that that sex is for marriage. Now, you might not believe that. You can take whatever approach you want. But if a child were to come to the position that sex is for marriage, then you've sidestepped all those issues. You don't have to worry about them. Um, but if not, then those issues are a potential risk. So keep the child away from hookup culture is kind of the same thing. Although I'm not a racist, I am sexist, and I do think there is difference in approaches that should be had between your boys and your girls. But by and large, just teaching them the importance of sexual responsibility goes across both genders. So with the gene wars, though, too, um, having it being important who they pick as a mate, so you don't get that cross contamination of those bad genes into your gene pool. You still want them to be able to pick a mate. So one thing that will kill a seventh generation warfare before it starts, and it's you're losing the gene war 100%, is if any of your children simply don't want children, or do behaviors that manifest in not having children. And some of those behaviors could be homosexual action. Babies don't come from a man's anus, or if they abort their children, all those sort of things, or even if they become asexual and are just repulsed by the idea. you are losing the gene war because there is no genetic um, copies being passed on to a next generation. So, in short, you have to be involved in your children's understanding of the whole relationship, sexual umbrella, and although you can't arrange marriages for them, arranging marriages is against seventh generation warfare. And it seems absurd to say at the time, but in the future, arranged marriages will come back um, to being socially acceptable. But arranged marriages are against seventh generation warfare because it does not allow for their will. Right? You are violating their will in arranging a marriage. However, you can play matchmaker. You can try to hook them up with other families that you respect the values of, and I think that's a strong match or good idea. You should not be hanging out with families you don't like the values of, and so your kids should only be exposed to kids who might have the attributes that you want. Um, and so if they can pick a mate from within that community, you're probably all right. Um, I'd like to just give a little bit of credit before I close out tonight that the term gene wars came from a Mr. Molyneux back in 2015, and he was discussing some reproductive strategies known as the R versus K reproductive strategies. This is seen by biologists all across the animal kingdom, and it has ramifications for human reproduction as well. In short, our reproductive strategy is when an animal is adapted to excessive resources. In this strategy, the species or person chooses quantity of children over quality. It tends to be the strategy of prey animals. And the five main traits of our reproductive strategy are aversion to competition, promiscuity, low investment in children, such as absent parenting or single parenting, uh, early sexual maturity and activity, and low loyalty or in-group preference. So that's our reproductive strategy. And the K reproductive strategy is chooses quality of offspring over quantity, invests more energy in each child after birth. It's more prevalent amongst predator species. And the five main attributes are embraces competition, delayed or monogamous sexuality, high investment and or dual parenting, late sexual maturity and activity, and high in-group loyalty. So you can kind of start to see how some of those things play out in human society, and I'll probably do a video on that at a later time. So, real quick, we discussed, genes of, what kind of things we don't want to potentially admit into our gene pool. I think that gene editing technology appears to be taking off. There are apparently already the ability for parents to selectively gene edit children for certain attributes is apparently a thing in some countries, and also there's speculation that gene editing technology is going into vaccinations and things like that. So it could very well be that even potentially as soon as our children, but certainly by the time our grandchildren are of reproductive age, that there will be two classes of people. There will be the gene edited people and the pure bloods or whatever they want to call it. And I think it'll be a more divisive issue than race at the time. And I think there might actually be a big parting line, more so on the part of the purebloods not wanting to mix with the gene edited people. But it's something that you'll have to start thinking about and staying on top of. What does that mean? educate ourselves on what genetics actually does. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not up to us who our descendants choose, but certainly if we don't want our children to mix with gene edited people, you gotta start figuring that stuff out, or just not care would be the easiest way. Seventh generation warfare doesn't take any particular stance on that topic. I'm just letting you know that it will be an issue in the future. And since we were talking about genetics and gene wars, it falls under this umbrella. So I hope I have conveyed to you the importance of gene wars. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I hope you see the importance of gene wars, that who we are and what we're capable of doing probably does have some genetic component to it. It's better to err on the side of caution. And when talking about securing the will of our descendants, one of the ways we do that is by not letting bad genes make it into our gene pool. I'm not ashamed to say that. And at least we all select mates carefully. We try to. That's the idea, is to be picky when it comes to selecting mates. And I'm just reframing the way which we go about looking at it. So, and nothing like this is the critical vulnerability of seventh generation warfare is who our children decide to mate with or not mate with, and who they choose as spouses or to marry, or whatever is really the critical vulnerability, because we have no control over that, and they can choose horribly, and it can have dramatic ramifications not only on their life but every descendant thereafter. So that is Gene Wars. Anyways, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. This is Seventh Generation Warfare. I'm your current host, John Nelson, and this episode was titled Introduction into Gene Wars. Thank you.